BloodStream listeners, Patrick here, and before we jump into the episode today, I want to take a moment to share and recognize the recent passing of Neil Frick, the Senior Vice President for Medical Programs at the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation. Neil was a part of NBDF, formerly the National Hemophilia Foundation, for over 25 years. His work included the development of healthcare provider materials, pre-conference symposiums, and the medical program tracks for NBDF's bleeding disorders conferences and webinars. He also supervised the awarding of clinical fellowships and other healthcare providers' awards and supported the important work of NBDF's Medical and Scientific Advisory Council. I'm recording this on Wednesday, July 10th, and earlier today, NBDF posted a tribute to Neil on social media, expressing profound sadness and highlighting Neil's invaluable role in advancing the Foundation's mission and the pride he took in representing the Foundation among the community. The tribute cited Neil's unique ability to bring people together and his tireless work to support all affected by bleeding disorders. We in this community benefit from many who come to work in the bleeding disorders space and are caught by the bug, so to speak. There are many who spend years and years of their career supporting us. But there are few, if any others, who have spent over 2.5 decades specifically supporting the work of our national foundation. Neil was a uniquely valuable part of the bleeding disorders family in that way, and for it, he will be dearly missed. Please keep an eye on NBDF's social media channels for more information as it becomes available. And thank you, Neil, for everything. Hello and welcome to the BloodStream podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, brought to you by Believe Limited and BloodStream Media, and made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. I'm your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch, flying solo today while Amy is in Paris or thereabouts. So allow me to be the one to remind you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions. On today's show, Hemophilia B gene therapy with Dr. Mark Redding, with a focus on clinical trial design in our recurring series on gene therapy for Hemophilia B, made possible by CSL Behring. We have caregiver and partner Makenna Dietrich. She joins Amy to share her introduction to and work in bleeding disorders advocacy in a segment that is made possible with support from Pfizer. And BloodStream is getting an audio facelift, which frankly doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's the best metaphor I could come up with today. Listeners, we need your help. We'll get to that. We've got that and a whole lot more on today's episode. Welcome to BloodStream, and if you haven't by now, please subscribe to the BloodStream podcast wherever you listen, Apple, Spotify, etc. Share this episode or segments from it with friends, family, or colleagues on social media, or simply tell them to check out the show, a show that is made possible, dear listeners, by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Yes, that's right, Takeda. Takeda's got this website, may have heard of it, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can learn all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorders community. Takeda believes in a world free of bleeds and are dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be, and you can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. One more time, though, do you need it? bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the BloodStream podcast, I would just like to say thanks, Takeda. Okay, so there are 2 news items that I want to share before we get... Oh. Well, that's a groovy little interruption that I didn't see coming despite what's in the script. How about that? Okay. Now, I wonder if this has anything to do with the Fans' Choice Music segment coming up later in the show. How about that? I guess we'll just have to wait to find out. All right, that's enough of that. So there are 2 quick music... That'd be fun. There are 2 quick news items that I want to bring up before we hit our segments. The first one is out of Business Wire, and it's titled Star Therapeutics Presents Clinical Data for VGA039, a subcutaneous therapy for the treatment of von Willebrand disease. So VGA039 is designed to be a universal hemostatic therapy for numerous bleeding disorders and potentially the first subcutaneous therapy for von Willebrand disease. So listeners, as you know, there is a monoclonal antibody that is used in the treatment of hemophilia A. There are antibodies being looked at for subcutaneous administration for hemophilia B. And now Star Therapeutics with VGA039 may have something in the works for von Willebrand disease. The phase 1 results in healthy volunteers demonstrated pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics for VGA039 that support convenient subcutaneous dosing and showed nearly 100% subcutaneous bioavailability, which I'll be honest, I don't know what that means, with a favorable safety and tolerability profile. And of course, safety and tolerability are paramount markers of a successful phase 1 clinical trial. There will be more on this. This was an oral presentation, or this info comes from an oral presentation at the International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis Congress, which took place earlier this summer. We have a quote from Jeanette Sesta, the executive director of VWD Connect Foundation. We welcome the ongoing progress of VGA039 as the potential first subcutaneous treatment for VWD to reduce the substantial treatment burden that currently impacts VWD patients and families. And I think we may have Jeanette on the show in the not-too-distant future to tell us a little bit more about what's happening in the treatment development world for von Willebrand disease. And the second news item that I wanted to bring to you is titled How the U.S. Can Close Long-Standing Racial Health Equity Gaps. The United States knows it has a health equity problem, but according to a new report from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicines, the nation isn't making much progress in closing health disparities. There's a quote here from the president of the National Academy of Medicine, Victor Duzau. When the Institute of Medicine released its landmark Unequal Treatment Report in 2002, we shed light on the fact that your race could determine the quality of care you receive. 20 years later, it is clear that our nation has not made enough progress. There are still major inequities inherent in the healthcare system. It is imperative that we achieve equitable health for all by committing to pursuing and implementing the goals and actions laid out in this new report. I won't get into the details of this new report. You're welcome to read the article or the previous article. Links are in the program notes. But the reason I wanted to bring this up, we've talked about social determinants of health here on the podcast before. The National Bleeding Disorders Foundation, currently the National Hemophilia Foundation, has a platform called Community Voices in Research, or CVR. And this is a specific way in which community members of the bleeding disorders world can contribute to the way research is handled all across the board, from initial inception, design, implementation, execution, communication of results, and so on and so forth. So if you aren't already enrolled in Community Voices in Research, I would urge you to, at a minimum, check out the website, bleeding.org/CVR, Community Voices in Research, to find out how you can help contribute to the future of research. As the late, great Val Bias would say, nothing about us without us, and I will add, not without all of us. Okay, those are the two pieces of news I wanted to bring to you before we move into the latest installment of our gene therapy segment, in which Dr. Mark Redding joins us to talk about hemophilia B gene therapy clinical trial design. In this next segment, brought to you by CSL Behring.
Welcome to the latest gene therapy segment. It's a whole new world, because it is a whole new world when it comes to gene therapy. I am with Dr. Mark Redding today, and we are discussing the unique clinical trial design specifically for the hemophilia B gene therapy, HemGenix. This segment is worth a listen for 3 reasons. Number 1, the HemGenix trial actually is distinctive from other gene therapy trials, which Dr. Redding explains really well, so it's worth a listen. But number 2, we talk about steroid use in the HemGenix trial. It is a hot button topic and certainly something to be aware of if you are considering gene therapy. And number 3, the reason that this segment is worth a listen is the answer that Dr. Redding gives when I ask him what he had for breakfast. Trust me, it'll blow your mind. This segment is brought to you by CSL Behring, a global biotherapeutics leader focused on serving the rare disease community by providing innovative therapies. They now have a first-of-its-kind treatment for hemophilia B. To learn more about this treatment option, visit beyondhemb.com and download the B Support app from the App Store or Google Play to stay up to date on relevant information and to manage your treatment journey. Okay, good sir. For me, will you introduce yourself and tell me where you're from, all the HTC things? Who are you? Why are you cool?
Yeah. That's a loaded question. Yeah. So I'm Mark Redding. I'm an adult hematologist. I work at the University of Minnesota, where I did all my training, and I've been for now 35-ish years. And I run our hemophilia center. It's called the Center for Bleeding and Clotting Disorders.
And what did you have for breakfast today?
I had a large bowl of cereal, Fruit Loops actually, and a Pop-Tart. I have a pediatric breakfast every day, although I do have coffee with cream and sugar. So that's the adult portion of my breakfast. But yeah, it's usually, that's how I start out the day.
I don't think there was anything better than the answer of a pediatric breakfast. That's making it in, sir. It's making it in. Right. Can you explain the unique Hemogenics trial design?
Yeah. So the Hemogenics trial, it was called Hope B, was the sort of the name of the trial. It's designed very similar to most of the phase 3 studies that are going on. So all these studies look pretty similar. But there's one thing about this one that I think is worth mentioning. Some people have pre-existing antibodies to these vectors that we're using. So these are versions of viruses that are present in the environment that a lot of us have been exposed to. And so it's not uncommon to already have some antibodies against the vector. And one of the concerns has been that if you do have those antibodies and we use this treatment, will it even work? And so in the Hemogenics clinical trial, there were some of the folks in that study that had these pre-existing antibodies. It was about 40% of them actually had antibodies, and they were not excluded from the trial. They allowed them to still receive the treatment. So I think that's the unique thing about this clinical trial design. There are other studies that have excluded individuals that had those pre-existing antibodies, and so we don't know how those treatments work in people with the antibodies. They're not allowed to get it in the study. So I think that's kind of the unique thing about this study. And it turns out that with one exception, it didn't seem to matter if people had pre-existing antibodies. So there was one subject in the clinical trial who had really high levels of those antibodies, and in that person, the treatment didn't work. They didn't make any factor IX. All the other people that had antibodies, they were quite a bit lower, and in that group, it seemed to work okay. And so I think that's a unique feature, and that's one of the things as we have more gene therapy treatments available to pick from. Those are some of the differences that we're going to be talking to patients about. This one will allow you can have this one if you have antibodies. This one you have to not have antibodies, or we won't be able to use it. I mean, those are some of the differences that are going to have to flush themselves out. And so we still have a lot to learn about pre-existing antibodies and how big of a deal they are. And so we're still doing studies to try to sort all that out.
What about steroid use? Steroid necessity.
So steroids is another hot button topic. So to kind of just backing up a bit, like what's the deal with steroids? And by steroids, we don't mean like the bodybuilding steroids, like get your muscles huge, right? We mean corticosteroids, the one that people commonly know as prednisone. And these are medicines that we use to sort of tamp down immune responses. So when we deliver gene therapy, that vector gets into the liver, delivers the gene, that causes some inflammatory immune response in the liver. And if that happens to enough of a degree, we worry that there could be damage to the liver or that maybe the treatment won't work. And so in the clinical trials, we've used steroids to kind of blunt that immune response. Now, the question is this. In some of the clinical trials, most of the patients have had those kinds of immune responses and needed steroids. In other trials, there's been a lot less of that. So in the Hemogenics trial, I think, for example, it was only about 20% of patients that had their liver enzymes elevate, indicating that kind of a response. And most of those patients were treated with steroids. In some other clinical trials, it's been more like 60% of the patients, and others it's been up to 80% of the patients. So the degree to which this immune response happens, and we see that we see the liver enzymes go up, and that triggers us to use steroids to kind of tamp it down. That has varied a lot from study to study. There are, some of the studies have used prophylactic steroids. In other words, we give them ahead of time to try to fend off that immune response. In other clinical trial programs, it's been a reactive approach: wait and see if it happens, and then use the steroids. We have a whole lot to learn about that. We have a whole lot to learn about the optimal way to manage the immune response. Part of the issue when we use steroids is if we use steroids for a short period of time, it's not such a huge deal. But if you need to be on them for a while, there are some side effects. They're not horrible side effects. They're not usually permanent side effects, but it can be pretty bothersome. People can have fluid retention and weight gain and upset stomach and trouble sleeping and all kinds of stuff. That's not life-threatening stuff, but pretty significant negative impact on quality of life. Especially if you end up on steroids for a long time. And in some of the clinical trials, people have needed steroids for many weeks. And that's kind of a bummer. So a lot of talk around steroids and, will I need steroids? If so, how long and how much? And honestly, we have a ton to learn about that still. We don't understand the optimal way to manage these immune responses and how important it is to tamp them down right away. That's all stuff that we still have to figure out. I don't know, honestly, if we're going to learn all of the answers to those questions in clinical trials. I think a lot of what we're going to learn is going to be in our real world clinical experience. So, even though you might be able to receive gene therapy outside of a clinical trial, it's going to be super important that we follow people long term to gather information to answer some of these questions. And the questions around steroid use and how important it is and how to optimally do it are some of the questions that I think we're going to need the long term follow-up of commercial gene therapy recipients to really understand that. So steroids is one medicine. There are other medicines we could use, but they have other downsides too. So anytime you're using medicines to suppress the immune system, there's concern that there could be downsides to that. So that's another big topic of conversation as we're considering gene therapy and talking about, is this the right fit for you?
How has the long-term follow-up been on the Hemogenics trial?
Yeah, it's been really encouraging. We just like a month ago, in December 2023, the American Society of Hematology meetings was held. If you want to go to a place where there's a lot of hematology dorks, that's the place to go. So a huge meeting, and this is a big splashy international meeting where everybody presents like their best stuff, So at that meeting, there was data presented, and they had the 3-year follow-up data from the HOPE-B study. So we have data now out to 3 years, and it looks really good. It shows that people's factor IX levels seem stable. The mean or average factor IX level at 3 years is in the mid 30% range. I think it was 38%, give or take a little bit. And it seems really stable. So that's really encouraging. We still see the wide variability. Some people's levels are much higher than that, and some are a whole lot lower than that. That hasn't changed over time. But the durability of it seems to be there. The other thing I think is really important to say is that the safety seems to be really good as well. We have seen no new safety concerns, no sort of late side effects or problems that have popped up. So really, really important as these clinical trials continue to follow their subjects long term. We're looking at safety very carefully, because obviously this has to be safe. And the good news is we haven't seen any major safety signals. So that's really encouraging too.
Thanks, Dr. Redding, for your candor, for your information, as well as admitting you eat pediatric breakfast. It's my favorite thing ever, and we have no choice but to stan. And I believe that's what the kids are calling it. Once again, this segment has been brought to you by CSL Behring, which now has a first-of-its-kind hemophilia B treatment. Visit beyondhemb.com or download the B Support app wherever you get your apps for more information.
Thank you, Dr. Redding. And let the record show that if Count Chocula counts, then I too am a fan of a pediatric breakfast. Once again, this segment has been brought to you by CSL Behring, which now has a first-of-its-kind hemophilia B treatment. Visit beyondhemb.com or download the B Support app wherever you get your apps for more information. Okay, so next up, we have a groove. Okay. I don't hate this. A second song interruption. Whatever could this be? I don't suppose this is one of the options for the new BloodStream theme music that's just come in right on cue. Or is it? Well, you'll have to find out a little bit later in the show. We're not there quite yet. All right, so listeners, as many of you know, before joining Believe Limited and BloodStream, my co-host Amy Board was the executive director of a patient advocacy organization in Colorado, where, amongst other things, she led the Bleeding Disorders Summer Camp. The next segment features Amy in conversation with Makenna Dietrich, the wife of Amy's former camper, Tyler. That segment is next, right after I let you know this next ad is brought to you by Pfizer. Did you know that Pfizer has been supporting the rare disease community for over 25 years? As part of their commitment, Pfizer continues to unlock the potential of new therapies. Recently FDA approved Becvez, or phytonacogene elaparvovec DZKT, a suspension for intravenous infusion, is now available. If you are curious about learning more and whether Becvez is right, talk to your doctor. Have questions? Get connected with a live individual one-on-one at 1-855-4-BECVEZ or 1-855-423-7839 from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday to Friday. Or you can sign up at becvez.com, that's BEQVEZ.com, to receive emailed information that can help you learn more. Visit becvez.com to learn more about gene therapy, sign up for additional information, and listen to real patients who are now living differently. And now, on to a real caregiver, Makenna Dietrich.
Listeners, I have the pleasure of meeting not with one of my old school Colorado campers. No. Today, I get an opportunity to talk with one of my old school campers' wife. How great is that? Makenna Dietrich, welcome to the podcast. This is like the biggest honor of all time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Lovey, I think your story of how you got involved in hemophilia and bleeding disorder advocacy is so cool. Tell me a little bit about your story and your connection to the bleeding disorders community.
Yeah, so back in 2018, I met my husband, Tyler, who you know very well, and he told me that he had a bleeding disorder called hemophilia, and I was a huge history nerd at that time, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're related to the royal family, and because he was just really trying to get a date with me, he goes, absolutely I am. I believed him for way too long than I want to admit, but finally we figured that one out. We ended up getting pregnant with our first kid when we were 20, had a boy. So because he is affected with hemophilia A, my husband's affected with hemophilia A, my son is not. And then we ended up having another kiddo in 2022, who was a girl. She is affected with hemophilia. And then we just found out today that we are having another girl. So she will also have hemophilia.
Oh.
So we got a lot of them. My husband goes, you're outnumbered now. The normals are outnumbered by the hemophiliacs.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
Yeah.
I'm like, apparently this is a weird thing in our house now.
You started a channel. You started a fantastic advocacy and awareness channel. And what was kind of the impetus to do that? Like, what really was the driver?
So you actually had Shelly on here a while back, and I went to the Mild Matter Summit that she talked about. And being there, we literally 3 days before I went to that Mild Matter Summit, my daughter had 2 bleeds in a row. It was her first 2 bleeds, and I was so overwhelmed. And so being able to go there and telling like other women and those who have the potential to menstruate that like my daughter has a diagnosis Like at this point, like I felt like we were like so far behind. And
Mm.
I was like, oh yeah, she's 11 months old and she has a diagnosis, because I was comparing her to my husband and they were like, that's amazing. Like I just got a diagnosis and I'm 32 years old, or
Yeah.
I'm 40 some years old. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So this is like, we are so lucky. And so I think I wanted to start that by sharing our story of how we were able to get a diagnosis, which it takes
Mm.
extreme amount of self advocacy for
Mm-hmm.
yourself and your child, but also like the differences between when we see in our house males and females, and how they are treated within the hemophilia world.
Mm-hmm.
Just even getting my daughter in for her first like factor level check
Mm-hmm.
was, it took way longer than it ever took with my husband. My husband got it at right at birth. She
Mm-hmm.
did get it at birth, but then her levels were higher because they are higher at birth. And they said, well, she's fine because she was at 49%. And I was like, she's not though, because her dad is severe. He has
Mm-hmm.
hemophilia. We need to get come tested again. So it took a lot of self advocacy in order to make sure that my daughter was able to get those testing. And then also we have medication in our home, which I realized again at Mild Matters that was like, that's not a norm, especially within the mild community.
Mm-hmm.
It's I always thought that it was a norm having a severe husband, of because we have buttloads of
Mm-hmm.
factor within our home. And I was like, why does my daughter not have this? So I think we are very much like, we've been through our struggles. Absolutely. We're still going through our struggles. But I think for us being able to show that self advocating for yourself, but also show like the hard times, the insurance stuff, like all
Mm-hmm.
of the in the ruts experiences that we go through. It's for me, very liberating. And it's a good source to like figure out my mental health, because sometimes I just need
Yeah.
like a screen to talk to be like, oh, like here's what we're going through. And I work really well talking through my problems. And then I was like, you know what? There's what, 30,000 other people living with this. And especially now, getting females diagnosed at a young age is starting to become more of a priority. And so I was like, if we're doing this, like, let's share our
Mm-hmm.
story so that we're able to like inspire other families who are like, oh, my husband's severe. We're going to have a daughter. Like, let's see if we can get her a diagnosis.
Tell me a little bit about the process of getting that, ever elusive factor dose for your daughter at home. I mean, that's just like a huge thing. I mean, for women, adult women, they should, I mean, if you are a man that has mild hemophilia, level to level, you have a dose at home. You
Mm-hmm.
travel with a dose, and like women don't have that. What was that journey like? Did it just naturally happen because we're starting to, like, things are starting to shift? Like maybe this is great, or was there a fight?
We had to switch doctors. So first, my daughter was not put with, she was put with a hematologist within our
Mm-hmm.
children's center. She was not
Okay.
put with an HTC hematologist. We only have two
Okay.
within the state of Nebraska.
Okay.
I specifically asked to go to one of them because I was told by other parents within our community that he was amazing with females and he was a great advocate. And I was told by some other nurses who are not a part of the HTC that he is too full and he's not taking new patients. And then I met a parent who's has a son who is younger than my daughter, and she told me she's seeing this doctor that I wanted to see, and I was like, okay, nope, like
Just
that's not gonna
yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
So I did a really big girl step and sent a very strongly pointed mom message, um,
Heyo.
to the HTC and said, hey, my daughter's not getting the care that she needs. I need her to see this doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since we switched to him, the ball has been absolutely rolling. She has started to not respond to the initial factor that they're giving her. So they want to give her a longer lasting one. And
Mm-hmm.
insurance is pushing back, but our HTC is doing an amazing job at being like, nope, she needs to be on this. They have done all the appeals for us. We haven't had to do anything other than sign a few pieces of paperwork, and they're like, we got this. And they have done an absolutely amazing job now that we got switched to the correct doctor and somebody that I know that is going to sit there and be like, instead of like second guessing me and be like, oh, this mom is overreacting, it's,
Mm-hmm.
oh, she knows what she's talking about because here are
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z points that we've had.
And what a shift. I mean, that's a huge shift. What are your I have so many questions. What's your advice to other parents, other moms that might be listening that have a child, a female that's mild? What are your advice tips?
Take pictures of everything. I did not take pictures.
Yes.
I was not a picture taker. I was like, who's going to have pictures of their children's bruises on their phone? This is so weird. And I realized really fast that they're not going to believe you unless you take a picture. Like, if I send a picture and I'm like, hey, my child is having a bleed right now, and they're like, oh, holy cow, yeah, she is, instead of, because she doesn't swell up like my husband does. Like, my husband gets a bleed in his thigh. It is ginormous. You can tell. With her, it takes longer to happen. So I take very progressive photos. I take them every single 30 minutes. And then I know the nurses sometimes are probably like, okay, lady, like, you need to stop. But I'm like, here, like, I'm showing you the progress of how they are. Like, she's not a instant impact, gets a bleed type of person like my husband is. Hers will take 6 hours to develop. And so I'm sending those photos all the time of, hey, here's where we started 6 hours ago. Here's where we are now. This is how she's acting. Like, log everything, I think, is a big thing. It's something that I never had to do in my own health journey because I didn't have a chronic disorder. And my husband is not very good at doing it either. So it's so bad. It is so bad. I have an app on my phone, and I have one for my daughter, and then I have one for my husband. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like,
oh my gosh, you're outing my man. Oh my gosh, that is like the best thing that's happened today. What are her actually, this is fascinating. What are her bleeding symptoms? That was one thing I was going to ask. Is it just bruising? Tell me a little bit about her symptoms.
So she bruises quite instantly. She does not swell. Her swelling will take up to 6 hours to happen. It especially will get real bad after nap time. I don't know why. The beginning of the day is a rough time for us. She also has absolutely no fear in life and is unaware of the fact she has a bleeding disorder. And we also aren't very helicopter parents. Like, with our first unaffected son, like, you're gonna fall a few times. That's just how we parent and how we've decided to. And we're doing the same thing with our daughter. Obviously, when she does fall, we are a little more cautious in watching her, but I'm gonna let her have those falls because, well, first off, she's extremely strong-willed, and if I don't, I'm gonna get yelled at by her. But they they don't swell right away. They swell within 6 hours. Her attitude completely changes, though. She is a happy, not scared of anything child. When she gets a bleed, like, she is cuddly and she wants to be held all the time, and she's kind of whiny, which is not like her at all normal. Does not want to be touched on a normal day. She wants to go off and she wants to do her own thing. So when she's in those moods, I'm like, something else is wrong.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that is so great about your channel is that it's really accessible. It's kind of like, honestly, in the bleeding disorder space, it's, we kind of don't have anything like it. So listeners, definitely check it out. Hemophilia Uncensored. Is that right? Did I get it right? Is there a hyphen? Okay.
I think there's an underscore in there on TikTok, but
okay.
Not on Facebook.
We'll put it in the program notes, folks, so you can get that underscore. But I think one of the things that I love is that you've made the content really accessible and really fun and engaging. And that's so needed, especially in this, I think, current fight that we're in for mild hemophilia, care for mild hemophilia, and for females in particular that, are classically undiagnosed as having mild hemophilia. So I just think that's so cool. You were able to, like, as a part of the channel, watch a program that Believe Limited was able to do, Beyond Our Blood, which is super cool, and just like provide some, we're just like being, content weasels about it. But like, tell me a little bit about your experience, like watching that film, watching that experience of, folks with hemophilia in other countries and like other experiences. What was that like, and what were your takeaways?
So I think for me, sometimes I get, not to compare our life experiences, because everybody goes through different life experiences, especially with a bleeding disorder. But I think I get so focused on sometimes every single thing that is going wrong, especially when
Mm,
it comes to, in our situation, the insurance system that we have. And
mm,
so for me, seeing how different countries control their insurance and how it's covered, and factors covered, is like, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're actually extremely lucky about this. Like,
mm.
I think it was Argentina that's only covered until 21. I'm like, how does that even help you in like the future? I mean, my husband's 25 and he has had so many bleeds in between those 4 years. Like,
Yeah,
and he has to be on a prophy regimen. And so, like,
yeah,
not like, I'm like, how are those hemophiliacs even like living? And then
yeah.
Egypt, like, they have to physically be able to show with our daughter, like, we would not be believed if we came into there and being like, hey, we are having an active bleed right now, because like I said, she doesn't swell like it, because she's not a severe. And so like, I'm like, if we lived in Egypt, like, she would not be getting the care that she needs at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think one that I really, really connected with was Anthony's. And I know I talked about this before, but I struggle with mental health. I've been diagnosed with anxiety, depression, PTSD, and my husband, I'm not going to speak for him, but he has mental health that he is currently dealing with. And I think just, I always connect more with like, mental health has never been a conversation that's always open. And so
Mm,
having somebody there that not only has a bleeding disorder and living with what we're living with, but also is talking openly about his mental health,
mm.
was being like, okay, I feel seen, even as somebody who's not physically connected to the bleeding disorder, not having a bleeding disorder, but I feel seen, just
Yeah,
having somebody else talk about mental health was something that I'm dealing with every single day.
yeah. Um, would you tell me a little bit about like how you would envision like your local community in Nebraska responding to it, and is it important for them to see something like this? Like, what were your thoughts?
So I actually talked to our chapter director about this, and I was like, hey,
Yes,
we should
Maureen.
show
Yes, love her.
and then, not to like plug another one in there, but the on the shoulders of
Shoulders
giants,
of
I was
giants.
like, we should have this at Ed Weekend. And she was like, okay, well, I'll look into it. So she is looking into showing these films. And I think too, like, I just went on a teen retreat with our local chapter. I was a chaperone there, and just, I think like, I hadn't watched them before I went on that teen retreat. And so I'm
Hmm.
like, now I'm like, ah, dang it, I wish I would have watched them. And like, we had some free time to be like, okay, guys, like, look at a different side of the story. Like, you guys are living with this every day.
Yeah.
Your guys' feelings are valid, but also like, there are so many other people in the world living with hemophilia. Like, I think a lot of the times we focus on America and the
Hmm.
United States, and that needs to be focused on, but also we have a bigger picture to focus on, a bigger
Yeah.
picture of hemophiliacs that need to be helped. And so I think
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing that you guys went and like showed what the wider band of hemophiliacs are living with, just so we're not so focused on, hey, here's what the United States is living with. We're also thinking about all the other hemophiliacs, and those with bleeding disorders.
I agree. We're also connected. We really are connected. We
Yes.
have very different systems and we'll never have the same system, but we really truly are
It'd be
connected in
amazing
our
if we could.
fight. I know. It just have like one common fight.
Right?
Oh, wouldn't that be great? Makenna, this has just been a joy. I'm so glad we finally got you on the show. My goodness, I've been such a fan of like the stuff that you're doing. I really hope you
Thank
get an
you.
uptick in people watching your stuff, and we will continue to support you. You're doing good stuff, and I
Thank
hope
you.
to have you back on the show to like get, updates in the things. Like
Yes.
you're doing really great, and congratulations on your
Thank
pregnancy.
you. I'm excited. We're having another one, so
We're having
we
another
have
one.
more content coming with another
3 deep.
hemophilia.
We're doing 3 deep. Thank you, love. And yeah, we'll have you back on the show soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you, Makenna, for joining Amy today on BloodStream, and thank you, Pfizer, for supporting this portion of the podcast. Listeners, discover how Pfizer is changing the treatment landscape. please visit www.beqvez.com, BEQVEZ.com. This was made possible by Pfizer. Ooh, a gentle beginning. A third song flies in off the top rope, like Tatanka circa 1995. Shout out to the WWE fans in the audience. I like this one. All right, listeners, what are we doing here? Here's the deal. It's time for a new BloodStream theme song to open the show, and we want your help. So you've now heard samples from the 3 songs that we've narrowed it down to. I'm going to play them each one more time, and then you are going to tell us which one that you want to hear as the new BloodStream theme. Is it song number 1? Okay. Nice strong guitar. It's a head nodder. If Amy was here, she'd probably be nodding her head. She's not. All right, this is song number 1. The Wolf Song. If you like this song or the Wolf Song, please let us know. Okay, that's enough wolf. Song number 2. Okay. This is same but different. It's groovy. Feels kind of summertimey, which, now in July and August feels very appropriate. Will it last all 12 seasons of the year, though? Can it hold up and stand the test of time? That's the real question with this one. You have to decide. Let us know what you think about song number 2. Same, but different. And then, of course, there's song number 3, The Oval-Shaped Coalition, which, right there in the title, a lot of questions emerge. Why is it called Oval-Shaped Coalition? What is an oval-shaped coalition? Where can we find them? Do they have an email address? Well, I don't know if the Oval-Shaped Coalition has an email address, but song number 3 can be the song that you want to hear if you email our email address at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. Song number 1, song number 2, song number 3. So how do you let us know? Email us, mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com, or check out our social media profiles. We're on all the major sites to let us know which of these 3 songs you'd like to hear as the new BloodStream theme. We have our preferences here in studio. We don't want to duke it out, so we're going to have you make the decision for us. We will have the new song, I think, set up by the first episode in August, if all goes well. So one more time, check out our social profiles or email mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com to let us know if you like song number 1, song number 2, or song number 3. Thank you again, Makenna and Dr. Redding, for joining BloodStream today. Thanks to Pfizer, CSL, and our presenting sponsor, Takeda, for making this episode of BloodStream possible. And once again, check out BloodStream Media on social media to weigh in on the new BloodStream podcast theme song, or email us your selection at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. Friday, July 26th is the next episode. We'll have the latest from I'm Fine, exploring entrenched resiliency, and I'll be speaking with community member and fisherman extraordinaire Brandon Young about a new project that he's working on called My Hero. All that and more next time. And with that is all for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to BloodStream wherever you listen to have the next episode delivered to you the moment it goes live. I am your host, Patrick James Lynch, and on behalf of Amy Board, producer Keith, and the whole BloodStream team, until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.